So I was saying that the interesting news is, folks, is that you should all be aware at the end of the article, a prediction was made, right, about the birth of the child of the Russian woman, right? And it came out. It proved to be correct. The prediction was stated as the child would be born on the 22nd or around there, but with the moon in Pisces. And that turned out to be the case. They were actually born 5 hours from the 22nd. They were born late in the day on the 21st with the moon in Pisces. So Ganesha be praised. But I want to say something about this prediction because another person here who's present with it also deserves some of the credit. So when I decided I was going to do this article, I contacted Ekaterina Dimitrova of Bulgaria, who is a very brilliant student. And the reason I contacted her is because I knew that she was present in Delhi at the international conference when K.N. Rao was teaching the Jaimini methods for timing this with transits using the Saptamsha. And I was actually there at the same time, but I was asleep because I was suffering from jet lag. And I knew that she always took very good notes. And as it turns out, she actually had a recording of the session. And it was useful because the parameters, the transiting Jaimini parameters that K.N. Rao gave in that classroom were slightly different than what he had given in the book, right? And so I asked her to work on it independently to see what conclusion she came as far as a date with the child would be born. I was going to be working on it, and then we would compare notes. And as it turns out, our notes compared favorably. She came up with the same time frame. So I want everyone to know that Ekaterina deserves credit for this prediction as well, and we should all give her a virtual round of applause. Okay, I wanted people to know that. All right, very good, Ekaterina. So now I'm going to share screen. And I'm going to be showing you here the chart of the newborn, a son. Now, just to review, from a Parasher point of view, what are the transiting parameters? What does K.N. Rao state in his book, Planets and Children, about what transits are relevant when a child is born? Can someone please state those transiting parameters or start to state them?
Transiting Jupiter, transiting Saturn within the 9-month period must be an aspect to the 5th house, 9th house, or 5th lord, 9th lord. Right.
With the proviso of what? That transiting Jupiter and Saturn should be considered as aspecting from the sign before when retrograde, right?
Correct.
And so I keep seeing that people are being asked to be admitted to the waiting room. And I just don't know. So, well, anyway, so that's two of the parameters. What are more parameters? What other transiting parameters from a Parasher point of view?
It was Mars transiting within 45 days of those 4 locations as well: 5th house, 9th house, and their lords.
Correct. So Mars comes into play here. And then in terms of the finest timing?
The moon. The moon should have aspected any of those 4 points, or the Lagna, or the moon. Correct. Within 72 hours.
Right. So within a 3-day period, 72 hours, the moon should have been aspecting or on the 5th house, 5th lord, 9th house, 9th lord. But then there's 2 additional, the moon itself, and then also the Lagna of the parents, right? Which, actually makes, a lot of days sort of eligible when you go to do this. So that's from the Parasher point of view. From the Jaimini point of view, what are the parameters we were talking about in the article? What from the Jaimini point of view, and again, we're using Saptamsha here. What's the relevant thing to be considered?
we have to look at the transits of Jupiter, Sun, Moon, and Mars on the PK in Saptamsha. Or the
So-
fifth house, fifth lord is also something to take into account.
Good, Miriam. So the idea is that planets transiting in terms of a Saptamsha, not in the birth chart, but in a certain Saptamsha, will be connecting to, either by conjunction or aspect, Rashi Drishti, sign-based aspects, to the position of the PK of the mother, right? And in which case, the relevant points are Jupiter within a, actually quite a long period, Mars within, a certain designated period, Sun within 10 days, and then the Moon within 72 hours, right? So look at the chart of the child. This is the chart of the child born. And if you recall, or I'll help you recall the chart of the mother was Scorpio Lagna, the ninth house is Cancer, where she had the moon, the ninth lord itself.
We're
And
not
she
able
also
to
had.
see the chart, Mark.
Oh, really?
Sorry to disturb.
Well, thanks for letting me know. Let me know if it comes up now.
We
Yes,
see it.
Okay.
Yes,
So you're seeing the chart of the child, okay? And recall that the mother's ninth house was Cancer. People are asking to come in the waiting room, folks. I had this on. I usually don't have it on. Oh, I see, admit, okay. Admit. Sorry about this. This is going to be annoying because people are joining late. Admit all. Okay, so the mother's ninth house was Cancer. It contains the ninth lord itself, the moon. It contains Jupiter, fifth lord. So you can see that Jupiter and Saturn in Capricorn of her sun, of her new sun, was aspecting onto those points. And then her fifth house was Pisces. So you can see that both Mars and the sun had moved it into Virgo by that point, aspecting onto the fifth house Pisces of the mother. And then the moon is in Pisces, which is the fifth house of the mother. Now, everyone look at the Saptamsha, and you can see that, let me give you the information that the mother's PK, which was Jupiter in her chart, is in Aries in her Saptamsha, So it's clear that, so look at Jupiter, folks. Jupiter's retrograde at 29 degrees of Capricorn, which puts it in the last Saptamsha, which keeps it in Capricorn in Saptamsha. But, some few days before then, it was in the various earliest degrees of Aquarius, meaning it would then be, where would it be in Aquarius in the Saptamsha? So can anybody tell me? Remember that, Saptamsha is like 4 degrees, 17 minutes. If it's in a odd sign, it will start there in that odd sign. So where would Jupiter have been just, some days prior to the birth when it was in the the late degrees of Aquarius? No one can tell me? Well, it would have been in a position where it was going to be aspecting Aries, the point of the PK in the mother's Saptamsha. You can see that the sun was there. Mars, just a few days before, was in Aries, and the moon within 72 hours would have been in Scorpio in the child's Saptamsha, aspecting Aries. I wonder, I can't tell, are people getting this? Are people understanding it? Is there a question about that? About, the parameters from the Jaimini transit point of view?
I think we get the parameters okay. I think it's just a calculation.
Yeah, people may
that's
not be
little
able to do
difficult.
do the right. So just think about this, it's an awkward degree, folks. It's 417, but you can just go by fours. And there are 7 septamshas. So there are 7 segments of 4 degrees, 17 minutes. The counting starts from the sign itself. If it's an odd sign, and it starts from the sign opposite, 7 from it, if it's in an even sign. So, I can't show days before, days after here, or I maybe could, but I'm not sure how to do that program, so I'm just doing it mentally. Anyway, look at this chart, folks, the new sun, and see, which period the sun was born in, right? They were born in Saturn, Mars, in Vimshotri, and then it would have been, of course, Aries. Right. Would have been Aries, Taurus in Chara Dasha. So what are some distinguishing features of this chart? What strikes you? Anyone?
The 5th Lord in the 6th house, and it's with the 6th and the 8th Lord. So 2, I would say, not so good factors.
Well, do you think it is actually an Arishta yoga? Is it an Ava yoga, or is it really not an Ava yoga, or what, rather modifies the idea of this? So the Lagna Lord, folks, is in the 6th with the 6th Lord, right? Which could be an Arishta yoga, or have some Arishta qualities to it, an Ava yoga, as it's referred to in Paladipika. When we see such combinations, what do we then also look for?
Maybe we look to see if there is some benefic aspect that's gonna counteract.
We see, yes, Miriam, and we see if there's any Arishta Bhanga, right? Any breaking of the Arishta and different things that could do that. What do you see here that would suggest that?
The aspect of Jupiter and a full moon from Pisces.
Correct. And then anyone else, you see anything else that you would add to that? Or anyone sees anything else that they would add to that?
It's not on the Lagna Lord, but on the Lagna. It's Venus and its Mula Trikona sign aspecting the Lagna.
Right. There's an aspect of a strong benefic. There's the aspect of a strong benefic onto the Lagna Aries. And, always remember, folks, benefics in Kendras will also produce Arishta Bhanga, whether or not they're actually aspecting the ascendant. Of course, Venus does in this case, but Jupiter, Nichabanga Jupiter, is also Kendra, in a Kendra. And as Miriam pointed out, this combination in Virgo with the Lagna Lord gets the aspect of Jupiter, although it's retrograde, which may not reliably protect, but this aspect of extremely bright full moon would have to be considered the aspect of a benefic as well. So really, this is not a true Arishta yoga. Okay.
Well, could I make the point that
Please.
here is a primary maraka, so its
It
aspect
is.
onto the Lagna may not be benefic.
No, well, it is a primary mark, Peter, but it would still very much account as a natural benefic aspecting onto the Lagna, and it would be a protective thing in this case.
Okay.
So folks see the Dasha sequence. The child is born in Saturn, will run Saturn up until age about 5.5, and then runs Mercury, right? Runs Mercury for a 17-year period starting at age 5. So it takes them up to age 22 and so forth. So think of what time of life that is, what's typically happening for a person at that time of life. Remember, this is a boy growing up in Russia. This combination in Virgo, what could it be good for? Some of you recently read an article, well, all of you should have read an article I wrote about the 6th house lately. I think I called it a tricky Bob or something like that. What could this combination be quite good for? What's a favorable side to it and why?
Competitions, sports or something like that.
Why, Angus?
Well, the sixth house is related to competitions, and Mercury also rules the third house, which is sports, and with Mars, which is an aggressive sort of competitive planet anyway.
And all that is true, but what shows the potential good success in it? Besides the fact that, the Mercury could involve him very much in competitive sports or games, not necessarily sports, but games also. But what would show potentially quite good success at this?
It's the Raja Yoga between Mars, the Lagna, and the fifth Lord Sun. This is the Raja Yoga.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there is a Raja Yoga related to that.
Right.
Well, 10th house, it has only an aspect from Jupiter, from the 10th house and from the 9th lord. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying this person is going to become a professional athlete. It's just that it would be very common. It's very common for boys to get involved in sports, to play games. Not always, invariably, but it is a quite common thing. And I've seen this, over and over again when a boy growing up is running such periods, third lord of sports, sixth lord of competition. But then what's rather special about this Mercury, besides the fact that it's in its exaltation sign?
Vargotama.
It's also Vargotama. And then the 1-5 Raja Yoga, Mars as a first lord, Sun here as a fifth lord. And then what about the moon? So the moon is the fourth lord, extremely bright. The moon could hardly be brighter. And so there's not just a 1-5 combination, but there's a 5-4 combination, right? And so, what sub-periods in particular might you highlight is, and then there's the aspect of Jupiter, of course, as the 9th lord. What sub-periods could be especially good this way?
Mercury Sun, Mercury Moon.
Mercury, Mars.
Sun, Mercury Moon, Mercury Mars, yeah. And then, even Mercury Jupiter. Now, what about this? So one thing I would predict, and I haven't spoken to the mother yet, but will at some point. One thing I would predict is that her son has combinations in this chart that's going to be very good for success in sports or games. And some of you, well, all of you, if you're again in this program, you should have read an article that I wrote at one point called The Hearts of Champions. It was all about the charts of world-class athletes. And again, I'm not saying this person's going to be a world-class athlete, but the kind of combinations that I was showing you, sort of the formula was always sort of combinations involving the third lord of sports, the sixth lord of competition, that then is connected to Raja Yogas and the person running periods at that sort of appropriate time of life, right? So, what else in this chart is a rather distinguishing feature that we've not mentioned so far?
9-10 Raja Yoga in the 10th house.
9-10 Raja Yoga in the 10th house. Now, many of you are aware that in my essay, Golden Keys of Jyotish, I was quoting from Parasher a while, where it says that the combination of Jupiter and Saturn, their mere connection, just them being connected, won't necessarily give a good Raja Yoga. In this case, they actually do, because there's ways in which they form Raja Yoga in other ways. It's Jupiter is the 9th lord and the 10th with the 10th lord. Of course, there's two Mahapurush yogas here, right? Malavi Yoga, but then also Sasha Yoga. But you'll notice that they were born in Saturn, and they'll run Saturn Jupiter actually from ages 2 to 5. What could this mean in the life of someone who's so young, just a child? What could this mean?
Could be a prosperous time for the parents.
Say again, Jay.
It could be a prosperous time for the child's parents.
Father in particular, right?
Right. Yes, sir.
And this is what I've seen this mean. But also, folks, this is very typical of things you see in charts. in the sense that you have potentially very good yoga here, but the right time of life is not going to be happening when they might most benefit from the fruit of that yoga. They will really never run the Jupiter period, and they're out of Saturn by age 5. So I mean more about what's happening sort of in the family circumstances in which they were born, rather than relate obviously to any sort of quote success or position getting of their own. All right, so I'm going to stop this share and pull up a document now. So what we're going to do today, again, related to the article, are people seeing a document now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what we're going to do today, we're going to retrospectively look at some births, both from from a Dasha and also from a transiting point of view. But then we're actually going to make a prediction. Someone whose wife is pregnant and is due to give birth in February of next year, February 22, the doctors have given the due date as February 9th. We're going to look at that and see if we agree with that date or what, if we might focus in on another date. So when predicting any event, such as childbirth, 3 things must be considered, right? Three major things must be considered. Does anybody have any idea what I'm talking about? What's the first thing that has to be considered if we're going to try to predict an event based on some birth chart?
Karka, Jupiter.
Static potential for having child.
Yes. The first thing that always must be considered is the static potential. Many of you maybe have heard me say apples don't grow on pear trees. This is my way of, sort of communicating the idea that if the static potential for an event doesn't exist within the chart, no dasha condition or no transit will bring that. So that's the first thing that has to be considered. And then the second thing, what's the second thing that has to then be considered after static potential?
Transits.
Would that be the second thing we'd consider?
The Dasha.
The Dasha
Dasha.
sequence.
Dasha, right. So if there's the static potential, is that static potential being activated in the Dasha sequence at a time of life where women typically bear children? That's the second major consideration. And then the third consideration is transits. The transits are always subordinate to dashas. And all 3 elements need to be there, folks. The static potential needs to be there. That potential needs to be being activated in the dasha sequences. And then supportive transits need to be happening as well. Supportive transits could be happening, but the dasha isn't right. That's not going to bring a child. Dasha sequence could show the potential for a child, but transiting conditions aren't supporting. It's not going to bring a child. So someone in this group here, and I believe they're in attendance today, offered their birth chart in relationship to the 2 children that they had. They had both a son and a daughter, right? And here is their birth chart. This is the chart of the father. I don't actually have the chart of the mother, okay? And what would you say about the static potentials for a child in this chart? And how would we sort of evaluate that, and potentially in what periods could that happen? But starting with static potential, what do we see here? Either favorable or unfavorable. And what do we normally start with when we evaluate that? When we started an evaluation of static potentials for having children, what would we normally look at?
Look at the
Starting
5th
out.
house, 5th lord, 9th house, 9th lord, and see whether or
could.
not there are benefic aspects to that or benefic placements for that.
And you could, there's nothing wrong with that. I actually prefer, Peter, to start with the Karaka itself, Jupiter. Okay? And so if we did that in this case, what would we see about Karaka Jupiter? Good, bad, or otherwise?
It's very close to Rahu, degree-wise, and it's with the 6th lord, Sun.
So it's in the, first of all, it's in the 12th house, right? we know that Jupiter is sort of very strong in Aquarius. It is very close to the Rahu Ketu axis, and with Mercury and the Sun, and you pointed out Sun is the sixth lord, so there would be some less than favorable factors associated with that. And what do we see about the fifth house, fifth lord?
In the eighth house, with the aspect of Mars and Jupiter.
Right. So the moon in the fifth house goes to the eighth, not particularly a great placement, but and does get the aspect of Mars, but it gets the aspect of Jupiter, which is very key to see here in terms of usually if Jupiter's blessing, fifth house, fifth lord, unless there's really, really severe affliction, it typically indicates that the person does eventually have children. They came a little later in his life, if I'm not mistaken. They happened after the age of 40 or around the age of 40. What other perspectives would we look at, folks, besides fifth house, fifth lord from the birth lagna?
We look at it from moon.
From the Karaka, Jupiter.
From Karaka, Jupiter, right? But even I think the next step after that would be from the moon. And here we see these four grahas are actually in the fifth house, right? Including Jupiter, but also then the fifth lord goes to the 12th, right? And then if we're being very thorough about this, we actually would look at Jupiter's position, Karaka Jupiter, as if it's the first house, see the influences on the fifth house from there, which would be Gemini, which actually gets again the aspect of both Mars and Saturn. So there was delay in this person having children, but as I've already given you the information, they did have two children, a boy and a girl. You'd also want to see Jupiter in the Saptamsha, right? In which case you see a very, very strong Jupiter in its exaltation sign. You'd want to look at the fifth house, fifth lord from the Saptamsha here. And so these are additional data points that you'd want to take into effect. Now, the person did have a son in July 14th, 1991, in the Mercury, Jupiter, Rahu, and if you're going down to even the Sukshma and the Prana Dasha level, which may not be reliable, but focus particularly on the sequence of Mercury, Jupiter, Rahu, going back to his birth chart, how could that clearly give a child? And it did. How could it be seen that could clearly give a child? Jupiter, Mercury, Rahu.
From the moon, they're all in the fifth house.
From the moon, they're all in the fifth house. And from Karaka Jupiter, Mercury is the fifth, as we mentioned, right? And again, those three grahas together. So this is how it can be seen. And it just highlights something that you've heard me mention over and over again, is that when we look at the potentials of a Dasha sequence, we must not just see it from the birth lagna, but also from Chandra lagna. The classics are very clear about that. And of course, even from the Dasha lagna, in which case Jupiter, Mercury, Rahu clearly indicates the potential for this. And then from the Charadasha point of view, the sequence was Leo, Scorpio, Capricorn. Leo as a major period. What strikes you about that? Leo is a major period. How could Leo, from the Charadasha interpretation point of view, how could this show the potential for giving a child?
The Karaka aspecting the fifth from Leo.
Correct. Did everyone hear Barbinda? Again, the technique with Charadasha, or one of the techniques with Charadasha, is to use Leo as if it's the first house. See the fifth house from there, the influences on there, and the influences are all the planets in the dual Rashis, but the most relevant one is Saturn as the PK aspecting onto Sagittarius, the fifth house from Leo. Now, Capricorn, consider Capricorn in the birth chart. Do you see any eligibility for this? And remember that we use padas in Jaimini. Remember that we use padas, in which case, how does Capricorn become eligible as a sub-period to give this event?
It's P5.
Fifth pada, yeah.
Right. So part of the fifth house, we start counting from Cancer and go to the Lord. Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, 4, counting 4 from Libra. Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, we come to Capricorn. So the reason Capricorn could bring an eligibility for bringing a child is because it's the pada of the fifth house. And then the sequence I said again was, and then Sagittarius, if we go, see the thing about, I mentioned this in the article, folks, when you're using the fourth and fifth level of Dasha with Vimshotri, it's always questionable because that would be very dependent on quite exact degrees and minutes of the moon, which would depend on a very, very accurate birth time, which is not always something that you have. In fact, very accurate, frequently you don't have a very accurate birth time. But with something like Chara Dasha and other sign-based dashas, they are not dependent on that accuracy. They're only dependent upon a correct lagna, in which case using the finer periods to try to zero in on close timing of events is not as risky and is more, you might say, safe to do that. In this case, Sagittarius was the sub period, in which case, what do we understand and see about that as to why Sagittarius could give this again? Sagittarius.
It's the aspect of the PK, and
It's the
the fifth house from there gets the aspect of Jupiter.
Good. So he's doing two things. He's looking at Sagittarius, both the influences on it, which are the PK, which makes it eligible, but the technique is then always, even on the untard, even on a sub-period level, using the Sagittarius as log, in which case those planets in Aquarius aspect fifth from there, which would be Aries, including Jupiter. But really, you could just stop at the idea that Sagittarius gets the aspect of the PK, right? Now, but again, if you went to Saptamsha and apply the same sort of parameters, you would also see that, from Sagittarius, Aries actually has the PK. So this is the chart of the father. And now, so sort of mentally make note of what is the fifth house, which is Cancer, what is the ninth house, which is Scorpio, where is the fifth lord, it's in Libra, and where is the ninth lord, it's in Pisces, in terms of seeing then the chart of the sun. Right? Now, did you remember what the fifth house of the father was? Remember, it was Cancer. So what would you note then about the first two transiting parameters, which would be Saturn and Jupiter? We would see that Jupiter is actually in Cancer, the fifth house of the father, and Saturn would be aspecting from Capricorn, right? And then we'd be looking at Mars and the moon. What would you note? Look at their degrees. What would come to mind then about Mars and the moon as far as just prior to the birth?
They would also be aspecting Cancer.
It'd be in Cancer, right? So you can see how these conditions are fulfilled. Dasha, and then supportive transits. The moon here within remember that Kane Rao is using the moon to time the birth within a 72-hour period, and actually within less than half a day, or even less than maybe a quarter of a day, the moon previously to the birth would have been in Cancer, and certainly Mars within that allotted time frame would also have been moving through Cancer. So you see the way in which these transiting conditions were all present. Now, going to Jaimini, we would look for the PK of the father and where it falls in Saptamsha, right? So you can see that in the father's Saptamsha, PK Saturn falls in Aries. So keep that in mind when we look at the Saptamsha of his son, right? So the closest timing would be done with the moon. What do we notice about the sun's moon as far as a connection to the father's PK in his Saptamsha?
Moon aspects onto it from Leo.
Right. So the moon in Leo would aspect onto Aries, the place of the father's PK. Now, if you look at the degrees of the sun, of the son that was born, and you just back that up to the this would give the last septamsha. It would be the sixth septamsha, which would be the sun in Scorpio, which of course would then also be aspecting onto Aries. Mars, right? Mars, when it's now in the second septamsha, if you just back it up a few days, it would be in the first one, in which case it would also be in Leo, aspecting onto Aries. Jupiter would actually have to move back 2 septamshas to be in Aries, but it would do that within the allotted time frame, right? So this is how we apply the Jaimini parameters, which has to do with the positions of the planets in the septamsha, making aspect or conjunction to the place of the PK of the father within certain days allotment that were spelled out in the article. Is it clear? Is there questions about that? Okay. So now they also had a daughter, and the daughter was born January 27th, 1994. Now here it was Mercury, Saturn, Mars, Rahu, Ketu. Mercury, Saturn, Mars, Rahu, Ketu. Going back to the chart of the father. So we already talked about why Mercury as a major period. Why Mars is a subperiod? How does Mars in this chart become eligible for giving this event, childbirth? Does anyone see?
Mars aspects the 5th Lord.
That's, I accept that answer, but there's another one.
It's aspected by the 5th Lord, Saturn from the moon.
That would be another one, a little bit more circuitous, something a little bit more straightforward.
Mars is the 9th Lord, 5th from 5th.
That's it, Drew. So always remember that planets in or ruling the 9th house, as the 5th house from the 5th, become eligible for giving this event. Right? And so I have to remind myself of the Dasha sequence here. So the son was born in what? Or the daughter was born in, Mercury, I'm sorry, Saturn was the sub-period. And then Mars was a sub-period, Rahu, Ketu. I want you to see the septamsha of the father. Do you see how Saturn is the 5th Lord, and it's in a mutual glance with Mars in the Lagna of the septamsha, and then the Rahu Ketu axis is along 511. So see a way in which the septamsha of the father, do I have this right? Yeah, the septamsha of the father is timing the birth of the child. What I also want you to see is that, remember that the sun was born in Mercury, Jupiter. What do you notice about, now they were together in the birth chart in the 5th house from the moon, which clearly shows why this event could happen at that time. But what do we notice about Mercury and Jupiter in septamsha?
5-9 in the septamsha.
Right. Well, from Mercury, Jupiter actually goes to the 5th house from there. Always keep this in mind, folks. And I've shown in my articles and books when I'm talking about the timing of children, I've mentioned this and showed numerous examples, and I've seen it over and over again, that a period and subperiod can become eligible for bringing this, even if that's not that evident in the birth chart, if they're falling 5-9 from each, or 1-5 from each other in septamsha, as they do in this case, right? Although, it shows it both in the birth chart and in the septamsha. So coming back to the birth of the daughter, in Charadasha, it would be Leo, Aries, Aquarius. Either Aquarius or Pisces as a sub-period level. Both of those were present on the day of her birth, the 27th January 1994. So how do we see that in the parents' chart? Again, this is the father's chart again. Leo, we already talked about, right? Why Aquarius? Why does Aquarius become eligible as a sub period or a sub period?
Aspected with Putra Karka.
Aquarius?
Oh, sorry.
The fifth from Aquarius. aspect.
Aquarius. Yes, that's what I meant.
Oh, I see. Yes. What's a more direct, sort of straightforward indication?
X, the fifth lord, moon.
Well, even more, even more direct than that. I mean, I'm not saying these things aren't relevant, but do you see that
Contains the
whenever
Karaka Jupiter.
that's it. That's it. But actually, that was it was Aries as a sub period. Aquarius was likely the sub period. Coming back to Aries for the father again, why does Aries show eligibility just on the birth chart as a sub period when this event happened? See the aspect of Jupiter as the natural PK, but then even more relevantly, see where PK Saturn falls in Septamsha. It falls in Aries, right? So now here is the daughter's chart. And again, keep in mind that in the parents' chart, the father's chart, Cancer was the fifth lord, Scorpio was the ninth lord, the moon as the fifth lord was in Libra, and the ninth lord was Mars in Pisces. Was Saturn and Jupiter making appropriate transits at time of birth? Remember that the moon was in Libra as the fifth lord, right? And you see Jupiter there was on the father's fifth lord moon. And where would Saturn be aspecting? That would be relevant. Saturn would be aspecting onto the ninth lord Scorpio of the father. Mars would be aspecting onto the fifth house Cancer. And the moon would be right there in the fifth house of the father. Do people see? Now remember that the father's PK in his Septamsha was in Aries. So what do we see clearly here that's relevant? Remember, we're looking for the influence on the PK position of the father of Jupiter, Sun, Mars, Moon. What do we see?
There are aspects onto the PK. The moon is with the PK.
So the moon is with the PK. We'll start with Jupiter. Jupiter from Aquarius is making a sign aspect onto Aries, the position of the PK of the father. Mars from Leo is also making a Rashi Drishti on there. The moon is actually there. Now the sun would not make that aspect unless it was back into Leo, right? And look at the position of the sun. So remember, a Septamsha is 4 degrees. The sun moves about a degree every day, right? So it was within that designated time frame, which would be 10 days prior. It would have been in Leo, making aspect again onto the position of the father's PK in Aries. Questions? Is it clear?
What role does transiting?
They'll challenge
I
you
was
to
just,
do-
was just
do
wondering
something.
what role
Sorry?
transiting Saturn plays there in Pisces.
Well, if you saw from what my quoting from his book, The Advanced Use of Charadash, in that chapter that had to do with this methodology, and then later, when he presented this technique in a classroom setting, Saturn, unlike in the Parasher system, is not being used here. And there becomes a question as to why, but and I've never questioned Kian about that, but it's not part of the predictive parameters that he gave, is using Jupiter within a certain time frame, Mars within a certain time frame, Sun within a certain time frame, and then the moon within a 72-hour period. Actually, in both of these cases, that is of the birth of the sun and the birth of the daughter, the sun, in the sun's case, the moon was in Leo the day of the birth, aspecting onto the father's PK in Aries, and here the moon is actually in there. So it times it actually very exactly within the actual day of. Right? Okay, so again, I'm going to stop for a second. Any questions about anything we've seen here or done here so far? Okay. So again, we always start with static promise. And you're looking at the chart of a woman who was born and grew up and was educated in India, but then she's a doctor and she came to the US after doing her medical degree in India and did her residency here in the US and has then just remained here and has settled abroad. Where's the clear combination in her chart that could show settlement abroad, living in a foreign country?
Fourth Lord and
4-12 exchange.
Yeah, there's an exchange between the 4th and the 12th lords, right? So what do you see in terms of static potential for having children here? What's the clear indication?
Fifth Lord and the 5th with Shubkartari Yoga.
So the 5th lord is in the 5th. It is with Mars, right? But it's also with the benefic Venus. And then what really sort of protects the 5th house is, of course, the benefic hemming on both sides, Jupiter in a exaltation sign on one side and Mercury in exaltation sign on the other. Think about the Dasha sequence, folks, and when a person normally starts giving birth, particularly an Indian woman, in what period was this person born?
Saturn.
Saturn major period, and approximately Saturn is the major period. And approximately how much balance of Dasha at birth, just estimate?
Nearly 17-18 years.
Correct. So, Saturn's nakshatra starts at 320. So they were born very, very early into the Saturn major period. So 17, 18 years. Saturn, of course, is 19 years. And so she has, let's say, 17, 18 years, and then followed by who?
Mercury.
Mercury. Up to age what, approximately, then?
36.
Add 17 to 18, so it gives you
35.
35. So of course, it's quite likely then that if she's going to have children, that they would come in the Mercury major period, right? How does, just based on the Rashi, how does Mercury become eligible for giving this event? And it did. It gave her children. So how does Mercury show some eligibility for that? Mm-hmm.
It's in nakshatra of sun.
So if you apply this principle I call Udu's clue, you'll see that Mercury's in the sun's nakshatra, barely, but it is. And of course, the sun is the 5th lord in the 5th house. So that's one way, but is there any other way that you see that this could be seen just on the basis of the Rashi?
It's part of that Shubha Upachari yoga, with the centering on the sun in the 5th.
That's an interesting consideration, whether that could be a reason that Mercury could give it. And my answer to that, Peter, is that it would be an interesting thing to explore in terms of other examples. I simply don't know. It's certainly activating that yoga, and it's a part of the yoga, but I don't know. What I'm referring to that shows Mercury's eligibility is something else.
5th Lord from the moon, aspect of a 5th Lord from the moon.
Right. So if you use Chandra Lagna, the moon in Pisces as a Lagna, the 5th lord from there becomes the moon itself, in which Mercury's in a mutual glance with. In other words, Mercury is in a strong mutual glance with a bright 5th lord moon from Chandra Lagna. But now, given a principle I was talking about earlier, what sub-period within the major period of Mercury, and given what we just talked about in the Rashi, would it likely bring a child? What sub-period within the major period of Mercury? Based on what we just talked about and what we see here in Saptamsha.
Mercury moon.
Mercury moon. Why, Peter?
Moon is in the fifth from Mercury, 1-5
That's it.
in September.
And in Mercury sign. Now look at the sub period that it took place. It was actually Mercury, Moon, Ketu, Rahu. Look at this in the Saptamsha, right? Mercury is under the influence of the Rahu Ketu axis, and then the Moon is falling fifth from there. And then if we think about the kind of results the Rahu Ketu axis gives in the birth chart, whose results do they primarily give?
Mars,
And
Venus.
both of whom are in the fifth house,
Fifth house.
with the fifth lord, right? This is why K and Rao always swore by Chitrapaksha Ayanamsha, and I have no reason to take issue with that after 27 years of experience. So the in Charadasha, it could hardly have been more obvious. It was Leo, 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 Aquarius. Leo, 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 Aquarius. In which case, the first three periods, Leo, 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 couldn't be more obvious. Obviously, it's the fifth house of the birth chart itself. Why does Aquarius, as a fourth level of the Dasha, as a Sukshma Dasha, why does Aquarius, how does it show potential for giving a child?
Aspected by Jupiter.
Correct. Remember in Jaimini, we're using Jaimini's special karakas based on degrees, but we're also always using stira karakas, meaning the natural significators of whatever the event is that we're looking to time, in which case, of course, it becomes, Jupiter's aspect onto Aquarius. So the first son was born then, and then the second son was again born in Mercury, in which case it was Mercury, Rahu, Venus, Venus son. Come back to the Saptamsha here. Of course, Mercury and Rahu are sambandha together in the in D7, and Venus, Sun are both in the birth chart in the fifth house. So that timing is fairly clear. In the Charadasha, it was Virgo, Sagittarius, Sagittarius, Leo. Leo as the fourth level would be very clear. Why would Virgo continue to give a child? Leo gave it obviously because it's the fifth house, but why does Virgo, as a major period in Charadasha, how does it show eligibility?
Contains the PK.
Virgo?
Sorry, I thought you said Leo. Sorry.
Fifth from Virgo has the aspect of PK.
That's it. Again, the technique using Virgo as a lagna, we look at the fifth house from there. It actually gets the influence of the three grahas in Leo, but also Rahu Ketu, so 5 grahas in general. But really the relevant point is what Jay said, which is Mars as the PK aspects fifth from Virgo. Right? And Sagittarius, it's the same idea, use it as a lagna. From there, Aries becomes the fifth house from Sagittarius, again getting the aspect of Mars as the PK. Right? So here's the chart of the first son. Now keep in mind the mother's chart, which we saw the fifth house containing the fifth lord is Leo. Sagittarius would be the ninth. Jupiter would be in Cancer. Moon's in Pisces, Lagna's Aries. So here's the chart of the first son. What do you notice about the moon in terms of the mother's chart? What do you notice about the moon here?
In the same sign.
It's in the same sign. So again, this is part of the parameters and something you'll actually see quite frequently. Remember that her ninth house was Sagittarius, and you'll see Mars aspecting her ninth house. The sun was actually back in her own fifth house in its own sign. Her fifth house was Leo. And Jupiter and Saturn, you can see here, both in Virgo, but within a 9-month period, where would they also be, what would they also be covering? Likely.
They'll be
Leo.
Leo.
Leo, and of course, if they were at a ever retrograde in Virgo, they would be, according to that principle, also be covering Leo, right? Now, we saw that her PK is Mars, and I want you to see that it goes into Libra in her Septamsha. So I'll show you now the Septamsha of the first sun. The sun, right? The sun is obviously aspecting onto Libra. Jupiter, if you get it in the previous Septamsha, would be in Taurus aspecting. The moon within 72-hour period would have been in a Septamsha of Libra. And Mars within that period would have come back to Libra as well. So now what I want to do, folks, is I told you that someone who's in this program contacted me and talked about how they're expecting their second child. The wife is pregnant and there's the due date of February 9th. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pull up the wife's chart. And give the current period down to the third level in both Vimshotri and Chara. So again, she's pregnant and is due, according to the doctors, February 9th, 2022. In what way could...
We don't see the chart.
Okay. That would probably be useful, wouldn't it? I'm not sure why when I screen share. Do you see it now?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Appreciate you letting me know. So you can see that in September, well, she entered her Saturn period recently, right? Entered it in October of 2020. She's still running Saturn. If we look at the February month 2022, you'll see that the sequence would be Saturn, Venus. Saturn, Venus would actually go until May of 22. So the child will be born in Saturn, Venus. How does that Dasha sequence give a child?
Saturn is exalted in the fifth from the moon.
Saturn is exalted in the fifth from the moon. Is there any relevancy from just the birth logna? Which house does... It's the ninth lord. Do you see, folks? So always keep in mind, planets related to the ninth house can give this event. It's doing it in this case, but as Peter pointed out, Saturn is also the ninth lord in the fifth. From there, see Saturn's degrees and see why it might also additionally have eligibility for bringing this event.
It's in Jupiter nakshatra.
It's in Jupiter's nakshatra, who of course goes to the ninth, right? And then do you see any eligibility that gets confirmed in D7? Where do we see Saturn in D7? It goes to the fifth, right? It's in the stabilization sign, but what?
It's the aspect of its lord, Mars, or there is actually an exchange between Saturn and Mars.
So it's a Nichabanga Saturn who is falling in the fifth house of the Septamsha, showing this eligibility. And then the subperiod is Venus. See this Sambandha relationship by dispositorship, in which Venus is in Saturn's sign. Coming back to the birth chart, as a sub-period, what makes Venus eligible for giving this event as a sub-period?
Venus is the fifth lord from
Jupiter.
Venus is the fifth lord from the moon. It's in the fifth lord from Jupiter. But please always remember that planets in or ruling the trions can always give this event, not just the 5th and 9th trions, but also the 1st trine, according to K and Rao, and I've found it to be quite true. But Venus, has a lot of different eligibilities here as a sub period for things that were already mentioned, right? So you can, I don't know how accurate the birth time is, 2:30, it might be an approximate time, but you can, pull it out and look at, finer levels here as it relates to the time frame when the child is due to be born, right? So you can see that, for example, Saturn, Venus, Rahu, which starts, that would be a little early. It goes up until February 6th. February 8th is Saturn, Venus, Rahu, Moon. So this is you could look at, but as I said, it's kind of risky to work on these finer levels in Vimshottara because it's dependent upon such accurate degrees and minutes of the moon. It's safer to work with Charadasha this way. And so, first of all, we look at the fact that this birth is going to take place in Libra as a major period. How would you see Libra as a major period having eligibility in the birth chart for giving this event?
It's
Actually, Drushti from PK.
So Sandeep says it gets the aspect of the PK, and that's exactly right. But then it's also very clear in Saptamsha. Why? Why is it? Why would I say it's very clear that Libra is going to give a child on the basis of Saptamsha?
It's in the Saptamsha, Venus is in Aquarius, and the PK gets the aspect from Libra.
That and the fact that the 5th house from Libra is Aquarius containing the PK. And then now if the child, here's an interesting consideration, if the child is going to be born before the due date, which again would be February 9th, it would, well, if it's going to be born before the 14th, which would be later than the due date, it would be Libra Scorpio. After then, it would be Libra Sagittarius. So both would have to be considered, but which would you like better? Scorpio as a sub-period or Sagittarius? First of all, does Scorpio show any eligibility for giving this event just based on the Rashi? And then also you would look in Saptamsha. Does anyone see any eligibility for Scorpio, either in the Saptamsha or in the birth chart?
In Saptamsha, Scorpio has Jupiter in it, the Karaka.
Yes, in Saptamsha, Scorpio has Jupiter. This is a factor to note of. And actually in the birth chart, you see that Jupiter, the natural Putra Karaka, aspects Scorpio from Capricorn, right? Sagittarius, can anyone make the case for Sagittarius? Who's the pot of the 5th house here? Can anyone calculate the pot of the 5th house for me? No one can?
It's Taurus.
Taurus. Yeah. So, how do we calculate potus? We put our finger on Virgo. We count how far indirectly in the zodiac the Lord Mercury has gone from there. It's gone to Cancer. That's 11 signs. Counting 11 from Cancer comes to Taurus. So really, in other words, there's no involvement of Taurus here in the Dasha sequence that we're looking at. So really, it would seem that Scorpio looks more favorable as a sub-period in Charadasha than Sagittarius, which actually would be within the designated due date, right? So the trick would be start working on the finer levels, right? And then we have again, with a couple of choices here. If it was going to be before the 9th, it would be Capricorn as a sub-period level. If the was going to be afterwards, it would be Sagittarius. Again, what do we like about Capricorn? Two things we like about Capricorn.
It has Jupiter and it aspects the PK in the Rashi.
Correct, correct. So I would zero in on that and then start pulling out the 3rd level. So, sorry. I'm sorry, not just the 3rd level, but the 4th level. So this is how you would tend to zero in on that. And what would be the logical next step if you started to zero in on more specific days using the finer levels of the dasha? What, according to the techniques that were described in the book, in terms of the fine timing within days, what would you then be looking for?
Transits.
And transits, but what transit in particular, Peter?
Moon.
The moon. And what would you be looking for here with regards to a transit of the moon? You would get out the ephemeris, which is what I did when I was timing, and see in the month of February, particularly early February or even later January, which signs the moon was going to be moving in. And you'd want to highlight, if it was moving through the 5th house, right? Or the 9th house, or the place of the 5th lord or the 9th lord. And then also the position of the moon itself, which would be Gemini, and even considering the Lagna, right? But you want to coordinate that with the chart of the father, right? So I'm just talking about the method here. Now, in the case of the predicting the child of the Russian woman, we didn't have an accurate father chart, so we couldn't use that. But of course, if you do, it's much to your advantage in trying to make this fine timing prediction. So I'm going to pull up the chart of the father. I can find it. Here it is. Yeah. So actually going back to the question of the current periods down to the 3rd level of Vimshotri, this child will be born in Venus, Moon, Saturn. Venus, Moon, Saturn. Just concentrate first on the period and subperiod. How does Venus, as a major period, potentially give this event? What makes it eligible? Anything?
Fifth
I
lord.
think the Lagna Lord, and it's also with the 5th Lord.
It's the Lagna Lord, but it's also with the 5th Lord, right? And the moon, do you see anything on the screen that shows how this could come in the subperiod of the moon? No, nothing.
Venus
Moon is in
and moon
Saturn's
are
nakshatra.
I'm sorry. Why don't we start with Miriam? Your comment, Miriam?
I was going to say that Venus and moon are conjunct in the Saptamsha.
That's it. That's it. Always remember, folks, that when you have a particular divisional chart and 2 planets are strongly sambandha, this indicates that the period and subperiod of such planets can bring significant developments related to that, the indications of that particular division. So in this case, just the mere fact that Venus and the moon are together in Saptamsha, particularly influencing the Lagna of this Saptamsha, makes this period and subperiod eligible, because really from the standpoint of the birth chart, you wouldn't likely identify the moon as being a planet as a subperiod that would give this event. Somebody mentioned the nakshatra that it's in. Could you say that again, and why did you identify that?
Moon is in Saturn's nakshatra. Saturn is Lord of the ninth in the fifth, aspecting Moon.
Right. And then, Saturn, and therefore as a sub-period is quite obvious. It's in the fifth house with Karaka Jupiter as the ninth lord. So that's, rather clear. Now, in Charadasha on the 3 levels, we're talking about February of 2022. So we're talking about Sagittarius, Leo, Taurus. How does Sagittarius become eligible? A couple different ways that Sagittarius as a major period shows eligibility for bringing this event.
Fifth from it contains the PK. It's also the lagna of the Saptamsha.
Right. So if it's the birth time's accurate enough, and I think it probably is in this case, but really the most relevant point is that if you, again, make Sagittarius a lagna, look at what happens to the fifth house from there. It's got 4 grahas in the aspect of another one. And more relevantly even, you have the sun here as an exalted PK. Fifth Lord is in the fifth house from there. It's just could not be clearer that Sagittarius could give this. And then why Leo as a subperiod? Well, let me just say one more thing, because Sagittarius has an additional eligibility. Does anybody see what I might be talking about?
Aspect of Jupiter.
Aspect of Karaka Jupiter, right? And then Leo, why Leo?
Rashi Drishti with PK.
Rashi Drishti with PK. And then also the fifth from Leo becomes that Sagittarius, which gets that aspect of natural Puchakaraka Jupiter. Now consider if the child is born before the 13th, it will be Taurus as a sub-period. If it were afterwards, it would be Gemini. Why is there a strong case for Taurus? And I would refer you to the Saptamsha. Do you see that in the Saptamsha?
PK Sun is in Taurus, and from fifth,
Jupiter.
fifth from Taurus contains Jupiter also in Rashi.
In the Rashi, the fifth house from there contains Jupiter. In the Saptamsha, the Taurus segment contains both natural Putrakaraka Jupiter, but also, so it's quite likely that it will be Sagittarius, Leo, Taurus. And then again, the trick to try to zero in on the day would be to start working at the finer levels and then coordinate that, particularly with the transit of the moon, both from a Parashari point of view and moving through a Saptamsha that would aspect the PK of the father, which of course, again, would be in Taurus. So that would be the methodology that you would use to do this close timing of childbirth. And this kind of prediction is one of the more satisfying, right? One of the more satisfying predictions. I was in Sochi in, I believe it might have been 2015, Sochi, Russia. I don't remember exactly, but I was basically teaching the timing of the birth of children, basically doing what we've been doing here. And I asked if there was any woman in the audience that was, wanting to have children. And if we could use their chart, to sort of see if we could make an in-classroom prediction. And one woman raised her hand, and as luck would have it, her chart actually strongly indicated that she could be having a child and within the rather near future, right? And so we applied all the techniques that we've been showing here, including transits, and I made a prediction about, it wasn't a close timing prediction. Normally, as I said in the article, if someone's asking you this question and you can even just tell them the year that the child might be born, or maybe the time of year in terms of, say, a 3-month period, say the fall, the spring, this little summer, the winter, something like that, which is what I did in this case. I wasn't trying to do the close timing. I think I zeroed in on, say, a 3-month period. and made a prediction. Well, fast forward to the next year, I'm again in Sochi teaching, and I see this woman with a big smile on her face and a man next to her with a child in her arms walk up to me and introduce me to the child whose birth I predicted. And then she informed me that they named the child after me. They named the child Mark. So this is what that's why I say this can be a particular type of rewarding prediction, which I've been able to make many times successfully. Thank you to K.N. Rao. All credit goes to him and to his mother, who he learned from these techniques. And as you can see, that they do work. And I want to acknowledge Ekaterina again today as being someone who co-authored this prediction that was fortunate enough to come out. So we've come to the end of this webinar. Let me just again open it if there's any questions about anything we've talked about here before we conclude for today. Okay, so we will conclude as usual with our Sanskrit prayer. Asatoma sadgamaya, tamasoma jyotirgamaya, mrityurma nutam gamaya, sarvesham swasti bhavatu, sarvesham shanti bhavatu, sarvesham purnam bhavatu, sarvesham mangalam bhavatu, loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.